All right, we are live.
Pepper's in the peanut gallery.
Oh, okay. Issues with the tablet situation here. So,
oh dear, is it falling off?
No, it's just there we go. Okay, I think that'll be fine. Okay, welcome everyone to day 4 of Daily Austen. The Isolated Literary Society presents Daily Austen with Sarah Shay. I'm Sarah Shay. This is Emma. I'm reading Emma for the first time. If you are somehow just finding this video first, you can go back to the rest of my channel and you'll see the previous days so you can get caught up. If you are finding this on Instagram and you missed the previous days, obviously the Instagram stories don't stick around more than 24 hours. So go to youtube.com/sarahshay to watch the previous days if you want to catch up. All right, we are about to start chapter 8. Emma has just convinced Harriet Smith not to accept Mr. Martin's offer of marriage.
By saying that she is not influencing her
yes.
in any way.
Yeah, of course. Sorry, I mainly was saying that in case anybody has read Emma before and they're just coming in, they kind of know where we are in the book.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah. All right.
Bringing the commentary up to speed.
Yeah. Strangely did mention on the phone this morning that he really enjoys our back and forth in your commentary. So.
Oh, good. Good.
All right, so chapter 8. Harriet slept at Hartfield that night. For some weeks past, she had been spending more than half her time there, and gradually getting to have a bedroom appropriated to herself. And Emma judged it best in every respect, safest in kindness, to keep her with them as much as possible just at present. I wouldn't want her to make any decisions without your control. She was obliged to go the next morning for an hour or two to Mrs. Goddard's, but it was then to be settled that she should return to Hartfield to make a regular visit of some days. While she was gone, Mr. Knightley called, and sat some time with Mr. Woodhouse and Emma, till Mr. Woodhouse, who had previously made up his mind to walk out, was persuaded by his daughter not to defer it, and was induced by the entreaties of both, though against the scruples of his own civility, to leave Mr. Knightley for that purpose. Mr. Knightley, who had nothing of ceremony about him, was offering, by his short, decided answers, an amusing contrast to the protracted apologies and civil hesitations of the other.
Well, I believe, if you will excuse me, Mr. Knightley, if you will not consider me as doing a very rude thing, I shall take Emma's advice and go out for a quarter of an hour. As the sun is out, I believe I had better take my 3 turns while I can. I treat you without ceremony, Mr. Knightley. We invalids, we are privileged people.
My dear sir, do not make a stranger of me.
I leave an excellent substitute in my daughter. Emma will be happy to entertain you.
Phrasing.
And therefore, I think I will beg your...
What?
And the garage band and YouTube. Wow. Shit the bed at the same time.
I leave an excellent substitute in my daughter. Emma will be happy to entertain you. And therefore...
All right. So I didn't lose very much of the garage band recording.
Okay.
Start it up recording again, and hopefully YouTube is back too. All right. YouTube seems to be going again. I don't know what happened there. It just suddenly said your connection is unstable, which has never happened before. So hopefully we're back. Okay, I'm going to go back a little bit since I don't know when that stopped, but I know when the garage band stopped. So...
Well, I believe, if you will excuse me, Mr. Knightley, if you will not consider me as doing a very rude thing, I shall take Emma's advice and go out for a quarter of an hour. As the sun is out, I believe I had better take my 3 turns while I can. I treat you without ceremony, Mr. Knightley. We invalids think we are privileged people.
My dear sir, do not make a stranger of me.
I leave an excellent substitute in my daughter. Emma will be happy to entertain you, and therefore I think I will beg your excuse and take my 3 turns, my winter walk.
You cannot do better, sir.
I would ask for the pleasure of your company, Mr. Knightley, but I am a very slow walker, and my pace would be tedious to you. And besides, you have another long walk before you to Donwell Abbey.
Walk 3 miles in all that mud? I'll not be fit to be seen.
Thank you, sir, thank you. I'm going this moment myself, and I think the sooner you go, the better. I will fetch your greatcoat and open the garden door for you. Mr. Woodhouse at last was off, but Mr. Knightley, instead of being immediately off likewise, sat down again, seemingly inclined for more chat. He began speaking of Harriet, and speaking of her with more voluntary praise than Emma had ever heard before. I cannot rate her beauty as you do, said he, but she is a pretty little creature, and I am inclined to think very well of her disposition. Her character depends upon those she is with, but in good hands she will turn out a valuable woman. I am glad you think so, and the good hands, I hope, may not be wanting. Come, said he, you are anxious for a compliment, so I will tell you that you have improved her. You have cured her of the schoolgirl's giggle. She really does you credit. Thank you. I should be mortified indeed if I did not believe I had been of some use, but it is not everybody who will bestow praise where they may. You do not often overpower me with it. You are expecting her again, you say, this morning? Almost every moment. She has been gone longer already than she intended. Sir, everybody tiresome that you would. Pointed stare. Emma knew this was too true for contradiction, and therefore said nothing. He presently added with a smile, I do not pretend to fix on times or places, but I must tell you I have good reason to believe your little friend will soon hear of something to her advantage. Indeed? How so? Of what sort? A very serious sort, I assure you, still smiling. Very serious? I can think of but one thing. Who is in love with her? Who makes you their confidant? Emma was more than half in hopes of Mr. Elton's having dropped a hint. Mr. Knightley was a sort of general friend and adviser, and she knew Mr. Elton looked up to him. I have reason to think, he replied, that Harriet Smith will soon have an offer of marriage, and from a most unexceptionable quarter. Mr. Robert Martin is the man. Her visit to Abbey Mill this summer seems to have done his business. He is desperately in love and means to marry her. He is very obliging, said Emma, but is he sure that Harriet means to marry him? Well, means to make her an offer, then. Will that do? He came to the Abbey 2 evenings ago on purpose to consult me about it. He knows I have a thorough regard for him and all his family, and I believe considers me as one of his best friends. He came to ask me whether I thought it would be imprudent in him to settle so early, whether I thought her too young, in short, whether I approved his choice altogether, having some apprehension, perhaps, of her being considered, especially since you're making so much of her, as in a line of society above him. I was very much pleased with all that he said. I never hear better sense from anyone than Robert Martin. He always speaks to the purpose, open, straightforward, and very well judging. He told me everything, his circumstances and plans, what they all proposed doing in the event of his marriage. He is an excellent young man, both as son and brother. I had no hesitation in advising him to marry. He proved to me that he could afford it, and that being the case, I was convinced he could not do better. I praised the fair lady, too, and altogether sent him away very happy. If he had never esteemed my opinion before, he would have thought highly of me then, and I dare say left the house thinking me the best friend and counselor man ever had. This happened the night before last. Now, as we may fairly suppose, he would not allow much time to pass before he spoke to the lady, and as he does not appear to have spoken yesterday, it is not unlikely that he should be at Mrs. Goddard's today, and she may be detained by a visitor without thinking him at all a tiresome wretch. Pray, Mr. Knightley, said Emma, who had been smiling to herself throughout a great part of the speech, how do you know that Mr. Martin did not speak yesterday? Certainly, replied he, surprised. I do not absolutely know it, but it may be inferred. Was she not the whole day with you? Come, said she, I will tell you something in return for what you have told me. He did speak yesterday. That is, he wrote and was refused. This was obliged to be repeated before it could be believed, and Mr. Knightley actually looked red with surprise and displeasure, as he stood up in tall indignation and said, Then she is a greater simpleton than I ever believed her. What is the foolish girl about? Oh, to be sure, cried Emma. It is always incomprehensible to a man that a woman should ever refuse an offer of marriage. A man always imagines a woman is ready for anybody who asks her. Nonsense! A man does not imagine any such thing. But what is the meaning of this? Harriet Smith refuse Robert Martin? Madness if it is so, but I hope you are mistaken. I saw her answer. Nothing could be clearer. You saw her answer! You wrote her answer, too. Emma, this is your doing. You persuaded her to refuse him. And if I did,
which, however, I am far from allowing, I should not feel that I have done wrong. Mr. Martin is a very respectable young man, but I cannot admit him to be Harriet's equal, and I am rather surprised indeed that he should have ventured to address her. By your account, he does seem to have had some scruples. It is a pity that they were ever got over.
Not Harriet's equal, exclaimed Mr. Knightley, loudly and warmly, and with calmer asperity added, a few moments afterwards, no, he is not her equal indeed, for he is as much her superior in sense as in situation. Emma, your infatuation with that girl blinds you. What are Harriet Smith's claims, either of birth, nature, or education, to any connection higher than Robert Martin? She is the natural daughter of nobody knows whom, and probably no settled provision at all, and certainly no respectable relations. She is known only as a parlor boarder at a common school. She is not a sensible girl, nor a girl of any information. She has been taught nothing useful, and is too young and too simple to have acquired anything herself. At her age, she can have no experience, and with her little wit, is not very likely ever to have any that can avail her. This is a bit harsh.
It is, yeah.
His being harsh on Emma is reasonable. His being harsh on Harriet in this moment is a little bit.
Yeah.
He makes a good point that she is not too good for Robert Martin, but
yeah,
and is reasonable to say that in the circumstances she's not good enough for him.
Yeah.
Since she allowed herself to be swayed by Emma's influence. However, he's being a little cruel here.
Yeah.
He's being a little classist.
A little bit. You could argue that he is pointing out to Emma what the way that most of the world would see her, like the more the realism of her situation.
He certainly doesn't think he's being mean.
It reads as it sounds really harsh.
Yeah. It's he thinks that all he is saying is what is true and pointing out how she is not too good for Robert Martin.
Yeah.
But certainly to a modern ear, it reads as rather.
Yeah. I mean, it is classist
harsh
because it's a very class-centered society.
Yes.
So
he is no more experience, and with her little wit, she is not very likely ever to have any that can avail her. She is pretty and she is good-tempered, and that is all. My only scruple in advising the match was on his account, as being beneath his deserts, and a bad connection for him. I felt that, as to fortune, in all probability he might do much better, and that as to a rational companion or useful helpmate, he could not do worse. But I could not reason so to a man in love, and was willing to trust to there being no harm in her, to her having that sort of disposition which, in good hands like his, might be easily led aright, and turn out very well. The advantage of the match I felt to be all on her side, and had not the smallest doubt, nor have I now, that there would be a general cry-out upon her extreme good luck. Even your satisfaction I made sure of. It crossed my mind immediately that you would not regret your friends leaving Highbury for the sake of her being settled so well. I remember saying to myself, even Emma, with all her partiality for Harriet, will think this a good match. I cannot help wondering at your knowing so little of Emma as to say any such thing. What? Think a farmer, and with all his sense and his merit, Mr. Martin is nothing more, a good match for my intimate friend? Not regret her leaving Highbury for the sake of marrying a man whom I would never admit as an acquaintance of my own? I mean, that sounds like a personal problem, Emma.
Yeah, it does.
I wonder
you should
think it possible for me to have such feelings. I assure you mine are very different. I must think your statement by no means fair. You are not just to Harriet's claims. They would be estimated very differently by others as well as myself. Mr. Martin may be the richest of the two, but he is undoubtedly her inferior as to rank in society. The sphere in which she moves is much above his. It would be a degradation. A degradation to illegitimacy and ignorance to be married to a respectable, intelligent gentleman farmer? He's a gentleman farmer.
Yes. Oh, that does make a difference.
Yeah. I didn't realize that he was apparently.
It counts
considered.
For their apparent wealth.
Yeah. That makes sense. I mean, in the movie, they certainly didn't. They were dressed as if they were fairly well. I mean, they could afford to send the two girls to Mrs. Goddard's school.
Right.
And Mr. Martin is dressed to an uninformed eye more or less like all the rest of the gentlemen.
Right.
He's not dressed like a farmer.
Yeah.
Anyway. He's not wearing overalls. Dungarees. I don't know what farmers actually were at the time.
Well, I mean, Mr. Bennet is technically a gentleman farmer. Like, he has an estate.
Is he? But he doesn't farm.
He doesn't.
But they never mention they're having a farm.
Well, they have the land that is worked because, like, they talk about needing Nellie because Nellie is at work. Like, the horse is being used in one of the fields.
Oh, yeah. That's the only mention they make,
Yeah.
though, right?
Yeah.
Huh.
Again, with the assumptions about knowing how things work in this society.
Yeah, that makes sense. No.
I think we're to assume that Longbourn is a working estate. Like, it is a gentleman's estate,
but it's called Longbourn, and his home is called Abbey Mill Farm.
Yes.
So it seems like he's a little more of a farmer, maybe.
It sounds like he actually works more than Mr. Bennett does.
He is.
Mr. Bennett has people who work for him.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. But he is a little higher in the class system than I think I realized.
Yeah.
To be referred to as a gentleman farmer. I don't know if that's a specific distinction, but it certainly sounds.
Yeah, I was kind of waiting to see because I couldn't remember if they were just farmers or if they were gentlemen, if they were actually considered like gentry or something.
Yeah, but she says he's not as genteel as she expected. Emma does when she first meets him, and Harriet says, "Oh, certainly no, he's not as genteel as a real gentleman or something like that."
Yeah.
So it seems like there is a distinction between a gentleman farmer and a gentleman.
Yeah,
but he's certainly higher up than just a farmer. Anyway.
Oh, the intricacies of the English class system.
Yeah. So much you were just expected to understand because it was obviously written for people at the time.
So. Yes. And there's so much about the English class system that doesn't really make sense anyway. So it's like you almost have to grow up with it in order to understand it.
I was looking for some information about honorifics, and I was reading the Wikipedia page about British honorifics, and boy, it makes very little sense.
They mentioned that a few times on Downton Abbey.
Yeah.
How it what you call people.
There's not a straightforward system.
No.
There's some guidelines, but then there's all sorts of specific cases where then you'd think that this person would be called the Earl of that, but actually this other person is called the Earl of that because technically his father. Anyway, it's like nonsense. Anyway, all right, back to the book. As to the circumstances of her birth, though in a legal sense she may be called nobody, they will not hold in common sense. She is not to pay for the offence of others by being held below the level of those with whom she is brought up. There can scarcely be a doubt of that her father is a gentleman, and a gentleman of fortune. On what grounds?
Because she wants it to be true.
Yeah, I could never figure out exactly. I was hoping it would be more clear in the book, and maybe it will be later, but why Emma is so convinced.
Because she's pretty
and genteel seeming. She just wishes it to be so.
Yeah. She's like, oh, this is a pretty fancy. I'm going to hold to it and treat it like it's a fact.
Just because somebody sent her to this school and could afford to send her to this school.
Yeah.
So probably, I don't know, it's just she's just so convinced. Yeah. And that doesn't give any reason.
Yeah.
Anyway. Oh, it does say, her allowance is very liberal. Nothing has been grudged for her improvement or comfort. Just, she has an allowance, and therefore.
Do they not know where it comes from, her allowance?
Yeah, that's what it seems like.
Huh, that is interesting.
It's I mean, definitely it's addressed later in the story, so I don't want to go into it too much now, but.
All right.
There can scarcely be a doubt that her father is a gentleman, and a gentleman of fortune. Her allowance is very liberal. Nothing has been grudged in her improvement or comfort. That she is a gentleman's daughter is indubitable. For some reason, my brain wanted that to say indisputable, which also would make sense.
Right, yeah.
But I was like, the letters are not in the right order. That she is a gentleman's daughter is indubitable to me. That she associates with gentlemen's daughters, no one, I apprehend, will deny. She is superior to Mr. Robert Martin. Whoever might be her parents, said Mr. Knightley, whoever may have had the charge of her, it does not appear to have been part of their plan to introduce her into what you would call good society. After receiving a very indifferent education, she is left in Mrs. Goddard's hands to shift as she can, to move, in short, in Mrs. Goddard's line, to have Mrs. Goddard's acquaintance. Her friends evidently thought this good enough for her, and it was good enough. She desired nothing better herself. Till you chose to turn her into a friend, her mind had no distaste for her own set, nor any ambition beyond it. She was as happy as possible with the Martins in the summer. She had no sense of superiority then. If she has it now, you have given it. You have been no friend to Harriet Smith, Emma. Robert Martin would never have proceeded so far if he had not felt persuaded of her not being disinclined to him. I know him well. He has too much real feeling to address any woman on the haphazard of selfish passion. As to conceit, he is furthest from it of any man I know. Depend upon it, he had encouragement. It was most inconvenient to Emma not to make a direct reply to this assertion. She chose rather to make up her own line of the subject again. You are a very warm friend to Mr. Martin, but as I said before, are unjust to Harriet. Harriet's claims to marry well are not so contemptible as you represent them. She is not a clever girl, but she has better sense than you are aware of, and does not deserve to have her understanding spoken of so slightingly. Waiving that point, however, and supposing her to be, as you describe her, only pretty and good-natured, let me tell you that, in the degree she possesses them, they are not trivial recommendations to the world at large, for she is, in fact, a beautiful girl, and must be thought so by 99 people out of 100, until it appears that men are much more philosophic on the subject of beauty than they are generally supposed, till they do fall in love with well-informed minds instead of handsome faces. A girl with such loveliness as Harriet has a certainty of being admired and sought after, of having the power of choosing men from among many, consequently a claim to be nice. Her good nature, too, is not so very slight a claim. Comprehending as it does real, thorough sweetness of temper and manner, a very humble opinion of herself, and a great readiness to be pleased with other people. I am very much mistaken if your sex in general would not think such beauty and such temper the highest claims a woman could possess. This is the only subject on which Emma has the high ground.
It's true.
And good sense.
And she is right.
And she is right. Upon my word, Emma, to hear you abusing the reason you have is almost enough to make me think so, too. Better to be without sense than misapplied as you do. To be sure, cried she playfully, I know that is something of you all. I know that such a girl as Harriet is exactly what every man delights in, what at once bewitches his senses and satisfies his judgment. No, Harriet may pick and choose. Were you yourself ever to marry, she is the very woman for you. And is she, at 17, just entering into life, just beginning to be known, to be wondered at because she does not accept the first offer she receives? No, pray let her have time to look about her. I have always thought it a very foolish intimacy, said Mr. Knightley presently, though I have kept my thoughts to myself.
How
But
so?
Well, from Emma, anyway.
Oh, okay.
He kept them from Emma.
That's true.
Yeah. He only talked to Mrs. Weston about it.
That's true.
But I now perceive that it will be a very unfortunate one for Harriet. You will puff her up with such ideas of her own beauty and of what she has claim to that, in a little while, nobody within her reach will be good enough for her. Vanity working on a weak head produces every sort of mischief. Nothing so easy as for a young lady to raise her expectations too high. Miss Harriet Smith may not find offers of marriage flow in so fast, though she is a very pretty girl. Men of sense, whatever you may choose to say, do not want silly wives. Don't they?
Yeah.
Don't
Also, like, how many men are sensible? Mr. Knightley, not everyone is
Well,
like,
that's a good point.
not everyone is like you.
Yeah.
Again, little bit of a blind spot.
Men of
Just a little
When
bit.
he says men of sense do not want silly wives, that may be true. But your definition of sense may not be as common as you might think.
Just because you hold in,
Not.
right.
May still choose a silly woman.
Right. Like Mr. Bennet.
Exactly.
Yes. Taken in by her beauty.
Indeed.
Finding later that her mind is mostly vacant.
Well, focused on things that are different from him.
Okay, sure.
Let's put it
All
that
right.
way. The most generous thing you can say for Mrs. Bennet. Her priorities are different from Mr. Bennett's.
That's true. I guess vacant is
Sure,
not really the
interests-
right word.
Yeah.
It's never vacant.
Yes. No, it's never
just,
vacant.
It's just always
quite
preoccupied with the
busy.
same, like, three things.
Yes. Men of family would not be very fond of connecting themselves with a girl of such obscurity, and most prudent men would be afraid of the inconvenience and disgrace they might be involved in when the mystery of her parentage came to be revealed. Let her marry Robert Martin, and she is safe, respectable, and happy forever. But if you encourage her to expect to marry greatly, and teach her to be satisfied with nothing less than a man of consequence and large fortune, she may be a parlor boarder at Mrs. Goddard's all the rest of her life, or at least, for Harriet Smith is a girl who will marry somebody or other, till she grow desperate, and is glad to catch at the old writing master's son.
Jeez.
That feels like a specific insult that we would get if we lived at the time.
I wonder if it's like an idiom or something.
The old writing master. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Is a writing master just a very low? Presumably he means master as in school teacher.
Is it writing like someone that she just came in contact with every day living at a school?
Oh, yeah, maybe. Yeah, just and presumably teachers generally. Teachers at this sort of school, not at like a university,
Right.
didn't have any particular claim to
No.
fortune or consequence, as they put it. We think so very differently on this point, Mr. Knightley, that there can be no use in canvassing it. We shall only be making each other more angry. But as to my letting her marry Robert Martin, it is impossible. She has refused him, and so decidedly, I think, as must prevent any second application. She must abide by the evil of having refused him, whatever it may be. And as to the refusal itself, I will not pretend to say I might not influence her a little. A little.
Yeah.
And I assure you there is very little for me or for anybody to do. His appearance is so much against him, and his manners so bad. What?
She's just so prejudiced.
His appearance is so much against him, and his manners so bad, that if she ever were disposed to favor him, she is not now. Now I can imagine that before she had seen anybody superior, she might tolerate him. He was the brother of her friends, and he took pains to please her, and altogether, having seen nobody better, that must have been his great assistant, she might not, while she was at Abbey Mill, find him disagreeable. But the case is altered now. She knows now what gentlemen are, and nothing but a gentleman in education and manner has any chance with Harriet.
Nonsense, arrant nonsense as ever was talked, cried Mr. Knightley. One of the few cases of someone crying something where that is the appropriate word. Robert Martin's manners have sense, sincerity, and good humor to recommend him, and his mind has more true gentility than Harriet Smith could understand.
Emma made no answer, and tried to look cheerfully unconcerned, but was really feeling uncomfortable, and wanted him very much to be gone. She did not repent what she had done. She still thought herself a better judge of such a point of female right and refinement as he could be, but yet she had a sort of habitual respect for his judgment in general, which made her dislike having it so loudly against her, and to have him sitting just opposite to her in angry state was very disagreeable. Some minutes passed in this unpleasant silence, with only one attempt on Emma's side to talk of the weather, but he made no answer. He was thinking. The results of his thoughts appeared at last in these words. Robert Martin has no great loss, if he can but think so, and I hope it will not be long before he does. Your views for Harriet are best known to yourself, but as you make no secret of your love of matchmaking, it is... Emma laughed and disclaimed. He continued. Depend upon it, Elton will not do. Elton is a very good sort of man, a very respectable vicar of Highbury, but not at all likely to make an imprudent match. He knows the value of a good income as well as anybody. Elton may talk sentimentally, but he will act rationally. He is as well acquainted with his own claims as you can be with Harriet's. He knows that he is a very handsome young man, and a great favourite wherever he goes, and from his general way of talking in unreserved moments, when there are only men present, I am convinced that he does not mean to throw himself away. I have heard him speak with great animation of a large family of young ladies that his sisters are intimate with, who all have £20,000 apiece. Bad.
Wow. Yeah.
I wish I had £20,000.
Seriously.
Period. Not even a year. Just £20,000. I'd take it.
A large family of ladies. Wow.
I am very much obliged to you, said Emma, laughing again. If I had set my heart on Mr. Elton's marrying Harriet, it would have been very kind to open my eyes. But at present I only want to keep Harriet to myself. I have done with matchmaking, indeed. I could never hope to equal my own doings at Randall's. I shall leave off while I am well.
Oh, please.
Pepper, you're just almost in the video. You should just... You're teasing everyone with your ears just popping up in the video. Everybody wants to see how cute you are.
You can tell everybody about the giant poops you have.
Please don't talk about that. This is a classy podcast, Pepper.
Oh, okay.
A podcast. Well, it may yet become one.
Mm-hmm.
All right. That's what I should do with the audio. Sorry, I'm recording the audio for all of these. Just slap it up on Patreon or something. Call it a podcast.
There you go.
Anyway,
Might as well.
Where was I?
Oh, I shall leave off while I am well.
Good morning to you, he said, rising and walking off abruptly.
I said good day.
I say good day to you, Emma. He was very much vexed. He felt the disappointment of the young man and was mortified to have been the means of promoting it by the sanction he had given, and the part which he was persuaded Emma had taken in the affair was provoking him exceedingly. Emma remained in a state of vexation too, but there was more indistinctness in the causes of hers than in his. She did not always feel so absolutely satisfied with herself, so entirely convinced that her opinions were right and her adversaries wrong, as Mr. Knightley. He walked off in more complete self-approbation than he left for her.
She was not so materially cast down, however, that a little time and the return of Harriet were very adequate restoratives. Harriet's staying away so long was beginning to make her uneasy. The possibility of the young man's coming to Mrs. Goddard's that morning and meeting with Harriet and pleading his own cause gave alarming ideas. The dread of such a failure, after all, became the prominent uneasiness. And when Harriet appeared, and in very good spirits, without having any such reason to give for her long absence, she felt a satisfaction which settled with her own mind, and convinced her that, let Mr. Knightley think or say what he would, she had done nothing which woman's friendship and woman's feeling would not justify.
Mm.
He had frightened her a little about Mr. Elton, but when she considered that Mr. Knightley could not have observed him as she had done, neither in the interest nor, she must be allowed to tell herself, in spite of Mr. Knightley's pretensions, with the skill of such an observer on such a question as herself, that he had spoken it hastily and in anger, she was able to believe that he had rather said what he wished resentfully to be true than what he knew anything about. He certainly might have heard Mr. Elton speak with more unreserve than she had ever done, and Mr. Elton might not be of an imprudent, inconsiderate disposition as to money matters. He might naturally be rather attentive than otherwise to them. But when Mr. Knightley did not make due allowance for the influence of a strong passion at war with all interested motives.
Mm.
Oh, but then Mr. Knightley, okay.
Yeah.
I understand the sentence now. Mr. Knightley saw no such passion, and of course thought nothing of its effects, but she saw too much of it to feel a doubt of its overcoming any hesitations that a reasonable prudence might originally suggest. Yes, there couldn't possibly be any other explanation.
I mean, he doesn't seem like a
For-
terribly prudent person. The way that he talks.
No, but prudent doesn't necessarily mean desirous of marrying well.
No. Yeah.
I'm just thinking, yes, there couldn't be any other explanation of his behavior around you, Emma,
Oh,
that
yeah.
would coincide with his desire to marry well.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, this illustration is placed in a rather bad spot. I think this is supposed to be Mr. Martin riding off after Mr. Knightley gave him encouragement. It says, and he rode off in good spirits. And I'm like, or in great spirits. I think that's what he says
Yeah, I think so.
to that.
Yeah.
They never put the illustrations in a reasonable spot for where they are in the story. Sometimes they come before the events, and sometimes
Yeah, I know.
several pages
I've
after.
noticed that with several books like this.
I'm
They're just
sure-
sort of randomly placed.
Yeah,
in there.
I'm sure there is a reason for where they are placed, but it's not where they would.
They're like, as long as it's in the chapter, it's okay.
I feel like it has something to do with like the layout of the pages or something. But
Probably,
I think
yeah. That does make
be
sense.
better if it was closer to where the thing happens.
Yeah.
Harriet's cheerful look and manner established hers. She came back, not to think of Mr. Martin, but to talk of Mr. Elton. Miss Nash had been telling her something, which she repeated immediately with great delight. Mr. Perry had been to Mrs. Goddard's to attend a sick child, and Miss Nash had seen him, and he had told Miss Nash that he was coming back yesterday from Clayton Park, that as he was coming back yesterday from Clayton Park, he had met Mr. Elton, and found to his great surprise, Mr. Elton was actually on his road to London, and not meaning to return till the morrow, though it was the whist club night, which he had never known to miss before. And Mr. Perry had remonstrated with him about it, and told him how shabby it was in him, their best player, to absent himself, and tried very much to persuade him to put off his journey only one day, but it would not do. Mr. Elton had been determined to go on, and had said, in a very particular way indeed, that he was going on business which he would not put off for any inducement in the world, and something about a very enviable commission, and being the bearer of something exceedingly precious. Mr. Perry could not quite understand him, but he was very sure there must be a lady in the case, and told him so. And Mr. Elton only looked very conscious and smiling, and rode off in great spirits. Oh, that's what this illustration.
Oh,
So it actually
gotcha.
is placed in the right spot.
Okay.
Miss Nash had told her all about this, and had talked a great deal more about Mr. Elton, and said, looking so very significantly at her, that she did not pretend to understand what his business might be, but she only knew that any woman whom Mr. Elton could prefer, she should think the luckiest woman in the world, for beyond a doubt, Mr. Elton had not his equal. And also that this pose makes a lot more sense for Mr. Elton
Yes. Yeah.
than Robert Martin.
It's
The illustration makes sense now. Okay. All right. Chapter 9. That was a long chapter, I feel like. Yeah, 36 minutes. I guess maybe we chatted more than normal.
Possible.
All right, chapter 9.
Oh, is that a fun little bookmark there, Pepper?
Oh, Pepper likes the bookmark. This is the bookmark in question, so people know why a bookmark would be so interesting to my cat.
Yeah.
I was just like, okay, I'm going to focus and read chapter 9, and then my cat was cute. So. It's so sad. All the people in the stream can see is me holding the book up and looking off screen. Okay, hold on.
There we go.
There we go. Come on.
There we go.
Be cute for YouTube, Pepper. You're adorable. He's so half-heartedly batting at it. All right. Enough kitty nonsense. Back to Emma nonsense.
Yes, indeed.
Chapter 9. Mr. Knightley might quarrel with her, but Emma could not quarrel with herself. He was so much displeased that it was longer than usual before he came to Hartfield again, and when they did meet, his grave looks showed that she was not forgiven. Good.
I know.
She was sorry, but could not repent. Bad. On the contrary, her plans and proceedings were more and more justified and endeared to her by the general appearances of the next few days. The picture, elegantly framed, came safely to hand soon after Mr. Elton's return. I'm sorry, I can't help but kind of laugh, thinking of how they chose to do the frame of the picture in the new movie.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
They chose that opportunity to do something with it rather than just
Gotcha.
pretty.
Gotcha.
They chose to do something that reflects Mr. Elton's personality. I'll say that.
Mm.
The picture, elegantly framed, came safely to hand soon after Mr. Elton's return, and being hung over the mantelpiece of the common sitting room, he got up to look at it, and sighed out his half-sentences of admiration just as he ought. And as for Harriet's feelings, they were visibly forming themselves into as strong and steady an attachment as her youth and sort of mind admitted. Emma was soon perfectly satisfied of Mr. Martin's being no otherwise remembered than as he furnished a contrast with Mr. Elton of the utmost advantage to the latter. Her views of improving her little friend's mind by a great deal of useful reading and conversation had never yet led to more than a few first chapters, and the intention of going on tomorrow. It was much easier to chat than to study, and the only literary pursuit which engaged Harriet at present, the only mental provision she was making for the evening of life, was the collecting and transcribing all the riddles of every sort that she could meet with into a thin quarto of hot pressed paper. Presumably that's like an old-timey zine.
It's like, yes.
Made up by her friend and ornamented with ciphers and trophies. In this age of literature, such collections on a very grand scale are not uncommon. Miss Nash, head teacher at Mrs. Goddard's, had written out at least 300, and Harriet, who had taken the first hint of it from her, hoped, with Miss Woodhouse's help, to get a great many more. Emma assisted with her invention, memory, and taste, and as Harriet wrote a very pretty hand, it was likely to be an arrangement of the first order, in form as well as quantity. I'm glad they took a little bit of time to kind of explain what this thing is.
Yeah.
Because they don't often do. So
yeah,
maybe it was sort of a new thing at the time, and she felt like she needed to kind of explain it to readers who might not have run into any gentle people who had taken up
like a scrapbook,
the hobby,
or the beginnings of the scrapbook.
Yeah, but it seems like it's mostly just writing.
Yeah.
Well, I guess you wouldn't have,
but then you like ornament it with things, and you put it in.
That's what I say. It's a zine.
Yeah, and you press it in paper, like put pressed flowers and stuff into
Regency zine.
There you go.
It's totally a Regency zine. Mr. Woodhouse was almost as much interested in the business as the girls, and tried very often to recollect something worth their putting in. So many clever riddles as there used to be when he was young. He wondered he could not remember them, but he hoped he should in time. And it always ended in, Kitty, a fair but frozen maid.
What?
That's got to be a reference to a riddle.
Yeah.
A real riddle from the time period.
It must be, yeah.
His good friend Perry, too, whom he had spoken to on the subject, did not at present recollect anything of the riddle kind, but he had desired Perry to be upon the watch, and as he went about so much, something, he thought, might come from that quarter. It was by no means his daughter's wish that the intellects of Highbury in general be put under requisition. Mr. Elton was the only one whose assistance she asked. He was invited to contribute any really good enigmas, charades, or conundrums that he might recollect, and she had the pleasure of seeing him most intently at work with his recollections, and at the same time, as she could perceive, most earnestly careful that nothing ungallant, nothing that did not breathe a compliment to the sex, should pass his lips. They owed to him their 2 or 3 politest puzzles, and the joy and exultation with which last he recalled, and rather sentimentally recited, that well-known charade. My first doth affliction denote, which my second is destined to feel, and my whole is the best antidote, that affliction to soften and heal, made her quite sorry to acknowledge they had transcribed it some pages ago already. Why will you not write one yourself for us, Mr. Elton? Said she. That is the only security for its freshness, and nothing could be easier for you. Oh, no, he had never written, hardly ever, anything of the kind in his life. Oh, the stupidest fellow. He was afraid, and not even Miss Woodhouse, he stopped a moment, or Miss Smith could inspire him. The very next day, however, produced some proof of inspiration. He called for a few moments just to leave a piece of paper on the table containing, as he said, a charade which a friend of his had addressed to a young lady, the object of his admiration, but which, from his manner, Emma was immediately convinced must be his own. I do not offer it for Miss Smith's collection, said he. Being my friends, I have no right to expose it in any degree to the public eye, but perhaps you may not dislike looking at it? This speech was more to Emma than to Harriet, which Emma could understand. There was deep consciousness about him, and he found it easier to meet her eye than her friends.
Yes.
She will just explain everything.
Whatever she wants to believe, that is what it will be.
He was gone the next moment, after another moment's pause. Take it, said Emma, smiling and pushing the paper towards Harriet. It is for you. Take your own. But Harriet was in a tremor and could not touch it, and Emma, never loath to be first, was obliged to examine it herself. To Miss Blank. Charade. My first displays the wealth and pomp of kings, lords of the earth, their luxury and ease. Another view of man my second brings. Behold him there, the monarch of the seas. But united, what reverse we have! Man's boasted power and freedom all are flown. Lord of the earth and sea, he bends a slave, and woman, lovely woman, reigns alone. Thy ready wit the word will soon supply. May its approval beam in that soft eye. I need to look up what the definition of charade is in this context.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like anything I know of as charades.
Yeah.
But I know charades were a common game at the time.
Yeah.
So
I don't know. I mean, maybe it was a different game that was called charades, and I've just always assumed they were doing the same charades that we do.
I did too.
But it sounds like it's just a poem.
Like a riddle. But
yeah, kind of a riddle-like poem, but maybe that's maybe it's a specific kind of riddle. I don't know.
Yeah.
She cast her eye over it, pondered, caught the meaning, read it through again to be quite certain, and quite mistress of the lines, and then passing it to Harriet, sat happily smiling, and saying to herself, while Harriet was puzzling over the paper in all the confusion of hope and dullness, Very well, Mr. Elton, very well indeed. I have read worse charades. Courtship, a very good hint. I will give you credit for it. This is feeling your way. This is saying very plainly, Pray, Miss Smith, give me leave to pay my addresses to you. Approve my charade, and charade, perhaps?
Yes.
And my intentions in the same glance. May its approval beam in that soft eye. Harriet, exactly. Soft is the very word for her eye. Of all epithets, the justest that could be given. Thy ready wit the word will soon supply. Humph. Harriet's ready wit, all the better. A man must be very much in love indeed to describe her so.
Wow. Even she
It's quite amazing, actually. It's pretty clever the way Jane Austen comes up with ways for him to be incredibly obvious and Emma to find a justification for why he's still talking about Harriet.
Yeah.
All the better. A man must be very much in love indeed to describe her so. Mr. Knightley, I wish you had the benefit of this. I think this would convince you. For once in your life, you would be obliged to own yourself mistaken.
Oh, jeez.
An excellent charade indeed, and very much to the purpose. Things must come to a crisis soon now. Well, indeed.
Yes.
She was obliged to break off from these very pleasant observations, which were otherwise of a sort to run into great length, by the eagerness of Harriet's wondering questions. What can it be, Miss Woodhouse? What can it be? I have not an idea. I cannot guess it in the least. What can it possibly be? Do not try to find it out, young lady. Do you think it is a good one? Can it be a woman? And woman, lovely woman, reigns alone. Can it be Neptune? Beyond him there, the monarch of the seas? Or a trident? Or a mermaid? Or a shark? Oh, no, shark is only one syllable. It must be very clever, or he would not have brought it. Oh, Miss Woodhouse, do you think we shall ever find it out? So I think maybe charade meant a riddle that it's a poem that just describes a subject.
Yeah.
Whereas a riddle is like, I am this, who am I?
Yeah.
Maybe a charade is one where it just very poetically describes a topic or a subject, and you're supposed to guess what the subject is?
Possibly.
I'll look it up after the stream.
Possibly. I don't know. I'm thinking of some of the riddles in The Hobbit, and some of them are that style.
That's
where
true.
It's not saying like I am this. It's just describing something.
Yeah, that's true.
And you have to figure out what it is.
Yeah. So I guess I don't know. Mermaids and sharks? Nonsense, my dear Harriet. What are you thinking of? Where would be the use of his bringing us a charade made by a friend upon a mermaid or a shark?
Give me a shark.
Give me the paper and listen. For Miss Blank, read Miss Smith. My first displays the wealth and pomp of kings, lords of the earth, their luxury and ease. That is court. Another view of man my second brings. Behold him there, the monarch of the seas. That is ship, plain as he can be. Now for the cream. But united, courtship, you know. What reverse we have. Man's boasted power and freedom all are flown. Lord of the earth and sea, he bends a slave, and woman, lovely woman, reigns alone. A very proper compliment. And then follows the application, which I think, my dear Harriet, you cannot find much difficulty in comprehending. Read it in comfort to yourself. There can be no doubt of its being written for you and to you. Harriet could not long resist so delightful a persuasion. She read the concluding lines and was all flutter and happiness. She could not speak, but she was not wanted to speak. It was enough for her to feel. Emma spoke for her. There is so pointed and so particular meaning in this compliment, said she, that I cannot have a moment's doubt as to Mr. Elton's intentions. You are his object, and you will soon receive the completest proof of it. I thought it must be so. I thought I could not be so deceived. But now it is clear. The state of his mind is as clear and decided as my wishes on the subject have been ever since I knew you. Yes, Harriet, just so long have I been wanting the very circumstance to happen which has happened. I could never tell whether an attachment between you and Mr. Elton were most desirable or more natural. Its probability and eligibility have really so equaled each other. I am very happy. I congratulate you, my dear Harriet, with all my heart. This is an attachment which a woman may well feel pride in creating. This is a connection which offers nothing but good. It will give you everything that you want. Consideration, independence, a proper home. It will fix you in the center of all your real friends, close to Hartfield and to me, and confirm our intimacy forever. This, Harriet, is an alliance which can never raise a blush in either of us. Now, let me continue to count every single chicken that has not hatched and never will. This is the definition of counting your chickens before you're hatched right now. This is ridiculous.
Yes.
She's just, oh my gosh, it's so awful. Anyway, we must hurry on if we're going to finish this chapter before, I don't think we have any chance of finishing this chapter before the Instagram live stream will end. So if you're watching this later on Instagram, you may have to come over to the YouTube to get the end of it, because I'm not going to start another Instagram for just a minute or two. Or maybe I will. We'll see how I feel when we get there. Ugh. Dear Miss Woodhouse, and dear Miss Woodhouse, was all that Harriet, with many tender embraces, could articulate at first. But when they did arrive at something more like conversation, it was sufficiently clear to her friend that she saw, felt, anticipated, and remembered just as she ought. Mr. Elton's superiority had very ample acknowledgment. Whatever you say is always right, cried Harriet, and therefore I suppose and believe and hope it must be so, but otherwise I could not have imagined it. It is so much beyond anything I deserve. Mr. Elton, who might marry anybody, there cannot be two opinions about him. He is so very superior. Only think of those sweet verses. To Miss Blank. Dear me, how clever. Could it really be meant for me? She's laying on the guilt without meaning to.
Yeah.
Oh, I never would have thought of this without you. And since I believe in you, absolutely.
Right.
I'm only believing it because you say it's true.
Right.
I cannot make a question or listen to a question about that. It is a certainty. Receive it on my judgment. It is a sort of prologue to the play, a motto to the chapter, and will soon be followed by matter-of-fact prose. It is a sort of thing which nobody could have expected. I am sure a month ago I had no more idea myself. Oh, the strangest things do take place. When Miss Smiths and Mr. Eltons get acquainted, they do indeed. And really it is strange. It is out of the common course that what is so evidently, so palpably desirable, what courts the prearrangement of other people, should so immediately shape itself into the proper form. It's amazing that this thing that I've convinced myself is going to happen really is going to happen.
Yes.
You and Mr. Elton are by situation called together. You belong to one another by every circumstance of your respective homes. Your marrying will be equal to the match at Randall's. There does seem to be something in the air of Hartfield which gives love exactly the right direction and sends it into the very channel where it ought to flow. The course of true love never did run smooth. A Hartfield edition to Shakespeare, which would have a long note on that passage.
Interesting.
Oh, a Hartfield edition of Shakespeare would have a long note on that passage. That Mr. Elton should really be in love with me of all people, who did not know him, to speak to him at Michaelmas, and he, the very handsomest man that ever was, and a man that everybody looks up to, quite like Mr. Knightley. His company so sought after that everybody says he need not eat a single meal by himself if he does not choose it, that he has more invitation than there are days in the week, and so excellent in the church. Miss Nash has put down all the texts he has ever preached from since he came to Highbury. Dear me, when I look back the first time I saw him, how little did I think. The two abbots and I ran into the front room and peeped through the blind when we heard he was going by, and Miss Nash came and scolded us away, and stayed to look through herself, however. She called me back presently and let me look too, which was very good-natured. And how beautiful we thought he looked. He was arm in arm with Mr. Cole. That is an alliance which, whatever your friends may be, must be agreeable to them, provided at least they have common sense, and we are not to be addressing our conduct to fools. If they are anxious to see you happily married, here is a man whose amiable character gives every assurance of it. If they wish to have you settled in the same country and circle which they have chosen to place you in, here it will be accomplished. And if their only object is that you should, in the common phrase, be well married, here is the comfortable fortune, the respectable establishment, the rise in the world which must satisfy them. Oh, yes, very true. How nicely you talk. I love to hear you. You understand everything. You and Mr. Elton are one as clever as the other. This charade, if I had studied a 12-month, I could never have made anything like it. You're neither as clever nor as creative as Emma is.
No.
I thought he meant to try his skill by his manner of declining it yesterday. I do think it is, without exception, the best charade I ever read. I never read one more to the purpose, certainly. It is long again, as long again as almost all we have had before.
Sure. Okay.
Sure. I do not consider its length as particularly in its favor. Such things in general cannot be too short. Harriet was too intent on the lines to hear. The most satisfactory comparisons were rising in her mind. It is a good thing, she said presently, her cheeks in a glow, to have very good sense in a common way, like everybody else, and if there is anything to say, to sit down and write a letter, and say just what you must, in a short way, and another to write verses and charades like this. Emma could not have desired a more spirited rejection of Mr. Martin's prose. Such sweet lines, continued Harriet, these two last, but how I will ever be able to return the paper, or say I have found it out. Oh, Miss Woodhouse, what can we do about that? Leave it to me. You do nothing. He will be here this evening, I dare say, and then I will give it to him back, and some nonsense or other will pass between us, and you shall not be committed. Your soft eyes shall choose their own time for beaming. Trust to me. Oh, Miss Woodhouse, what a pity that I must not write this beautiful charade into my book. I am sure I have not got one half so good. Leave out the last two lines, and there is no reason why you should not write it into your book. No, but those two lines are the best of all. Granted, for private enjoyment, and for private enjoyment keep them. But they are not at all the less written, you know, because you divide them. The couplet does not cease to be, nor does its meaning change. But take it away, and all appropriation ceases, and a very pretty, gallant charade remains, fit for any collection. Depend upon it, he would not like to have his charade slighted much better than his passion. A poet in love must be encouraged in both capacities, or neither. Give me the book. I shall write it down, and then there can be no possible reflection on you.
Is that Harriet talking or
Wait.
Emma?
No, I can't tell.
It sounds like
Oh!
more.
Yeah,
More
this was
words
really
than-
confusing.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be, Those 2 lines are the best of all granted for private enjoyment, and for private enjoyment keep them. Okay.
Yeah.
God, I was so confused. I'm like, none of this makes any sense.
Yeah, it didn't
They
sound
didn't
like
put-
the way that
They didn't put
Harriet
a return. They didn't put a break between, like a carriage return between the lines. They didn't put a
Right.
paragraph break.
Right.
Words. They didn't put a paragraph break between them.
Yeah.
So that's why I was like confused by all the lines.
Yeah.
There's like, but those 2 lines are, and then a very long line,
Yeah.
and then a close quotation, and then another line, and then an open quotation, the best of all. Anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, that was Emma. Just trust me that was Emma. It makes so much more sense. She's convincing Harriet. Don't worry about it. It still reads just fine. I thought it was Emma kind of, or Harriet, like talking herself into writing it in there,
Yeah.
but it didn't sound like Harriet.
Yeah.
She didn't ask anyone's opinion during it, so.
Yeah. No.
Harriet submitted, though her mind could hardly separate the parts, so as to feel quite that her friend were not writing down a declaration of love. It seemed too precious an offering for any degree of publicity. I shall never let that book go out of my own hands, said she. Very well, replied Emma, a most natural feeling, and the longer it lasts, the better I shall be pleased. But here is my father coming. You will not object to my reading the charade to him. It will give him so much pleasure. He loves anything of the sort, and especially anything that pays woman a compliment. He has the tenderest spirit of gallantry towards us all. You must let me read it to him. Harriet looked grave. My dear Harriet, you must not refine too much upon the charade. You will betray your feelings improperly if you are too conscious and too quick, and appear to affix more meaning, or even quite all the meaning which may be affixed to it. Do not be overpowered by such a little tribute of admiration. If he had been anxious for secrecy, he would not have left the paper while I was by. But he rather pushed it towards me than towards you. Do not let us be too solemn on the business. He has encouragement enough to proceed, and without our sighing out our souls over this charade. Oh no, I hope I shall not be ridiculous about it. Do as you please. Mr. Woodhouse came in, and very soon led to the subject again, by the recurrence of his frequent inquiry of, well, my dears, how does your book go on? Have you got anything fresh? Yes, Papa, we have something to read to you, something quite fresh. A piece of paper was found on the table this morning, dropped, we suppose, by a fairy, containing a very pretty charade, and we have just copied it in. She read it to him, just as he liked to have anything read, slowly and distinctly, with about 2 or 3 times over, with explanations of every part as she proceeded. And he was very much pleased, and as she had foreseen, especially struck with the complimentary conclusion. Aye, that's very just indeed. That's very properly said. Very true. Woman, lovely woman. It is such a pretty charade, my dear, that I can easily guess what fairy brought it. Nobody could have written so prettily but you, Emma. Emma only nodded and smiled. After a little thinking, and a very tender sigh, he added, "No, it is no difficulty to see who you take after. Your dear mother was so clever at all those things. If I had but her memory. But I can remember nothing at all, not even that particular riddle which you have heard me mention. I can only recollect the first stanza, and there are several. Kitty, a fair but frozen maid, kindled a flame I yet deplore. The hoodwinked boy I called to aid, though of his near approach afraid, so fatal to my suit before. And that is all I can recollect of it, but it is very clever all the way through. But I think, my dear, you said you had got it? Yes, Papa. It is written out in our second page. We copied it from the elegant extracts. It was Garrick's, you know. Aye, very true. I wish I could recollect more of it. Kitty, a fair but frozen maid. Oh, our Instagram video has ended, and I will start another one.
There we go.
There we go. I don't know when, I'm not sure exactly when the Instagram ended, but really, if you missed anything at all, you missed a bunch of them sighing and misunderstanding poetry. So
Yes.
The name makes me think of poor Isabella, for she was very near being christened Catherine after her grandmamma. I hope we shall have her here. Next week. Have you thought, my dear, where you shall put her, and what room there will be for the children? Oh, yes, she will have her own room, of course, the room she always has. And there is the nursery for the children, just as usual, you know. Why should there be any change? I do not know, my dear, but it is so long since she was here, not since last Easter, and then only for a few days. Mr. John Knightley's being a lawyer is very inconvenient. Poor Isabella, she is sadly taken away from us all, and how sorry she will be when she comes not to see Miss Taylor here. She will not be surprised, Papa, at least. I do not know, my dear. I am sure I was very much surprised when I first heard she was going to be married.
We must ask Mr. and Mrs. Weston to dine with us while Isabella is here.
It is unfortunate they cannot stay longer, but it seems a case of necessity. Mr. John Knightley must be in town again on the 28th. Oh, well, hold on. Oh, yes, I'm sorry, I skipped a paragraph.
We must ask Mr. and Mrs. Weston to dine with us while Isabella is here.
Yes, my dear, if there is time. But,
In a very depressed tone,
she is coming only for 1 week. There will not be time for anything. A whole week.
It is unfortunate they cannot stay longer, but it seems a case of necessity. Mr. John Knightley must be in town again on the 28th, and we ought to be thankful, Papa, that they are to have the whole of the time they can give to the country, that 2 or 3 days are not to be taken out for the Abbey. Mr. Knightley promises to give up his claim this Christmas, though you know it is longer since they were with him than with us.
It would be very hard indeed, my dear, if poor Isabella were to be anywhere but at Hartfield.
Mr. Woodhouse could never allow for Mr. Knightley's claims on his brother, or anybody's claims on Isabella, except his own. He sat musing a little while, and then said,
But I do not see why poor Isabella should be obliged to go back so soon, though he does. I think, Emma, I shall try and persuade her to stay longer with us. She and the children might stay very well.
Ah, Papa, that is what you never have been able to accomplish, and I do not think you ever will. Isabella cannot bear to stay behind her husband. That was too true for contradiction. Unwelcome as it was, Mr. Woodhouse could only give a submissive sigh, and as Emma saw his spirits affected by the idea of his daughter's attachment to her husband, she immediately led to such a branch on the subject as must raise them.
It's so depressing when your children love their spouses.
I know. Dreadful. That she should be attached to anyone but me.
Yes.
Harriet, let's give us as much of it. Okay. I had to read more of the line to decide who was talking.
Yes. Well,
Harriet
that's fair.
Harriet must give us as much of her company as she can while my brother and sister are here. I am sure she will be pleased with the children. We are very proud of the children, are we not, Papa? I wonder which you will think the handsomest, Henry or John.
I wonder which she will. Poor little dears, how glad they will be to come. They are very fond of being at Hartfield, Harriet.
I dare say they are, sir. I am not sure. I am sure I do not know who is not.
Henry is a fine boy, but John is very like his mamma. Mamma or mama? Mamma? I think it's mamma.
I don't know, I've heard people say mama, so
I feel like in Pride and Prejudice they would say mamma.
yeah, it could be a
French
an
thing.
upper class thing. Yeah. The French.
Henry is a fine boy, but John is very like his mamma. Henry is the eldest, and he was named after me, not after his father.
What?
Apparently, Mr. Woodhouse and the oh, I see what they're saying.
Wait, is
No,
Henry
John?
Mr.
Yeah,
Knightley?
no, yeah, no,
older Mr.
John.
Knightley?
John is. Oh, Mr. Knightley is actually older.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but when they say Mr. John Knightley, it means Isabella's husband,
Yes,
the younger
yes.
brother.
I just realized that when he says, Mr. Woodhouse says, Henry is the eldest. He was named after me, not after his father. He's just pointing out that John, one of the children, John, was named after his father. And he just had to point out that the other child was named after me, not after his father. It's like pretty clear since at first I was like, wait, are they both named Henry? No, it's Mr. John Knightley. That is, oh God, Mr. Woodhouse is so ridiculous.
He is, yes.
John the second is named after his father. Some people are surprised, I believe, that the eldest was not, but Isabella would have him called Henry, which I thought very pretty of her. And he's a very clever boy indeed. They are all remarkably clever, and they have so many pretty ways. They will come and stand by my chair and say, Grandpapa, can you give me a little bit of string? And once Henry asked me for a knife, and I told him knives were only for grandpapas. I think their father is too rough with them very often.
He appears very rough to you, said Emma, because you are so very gentle yourself. But if you could compare him with other papas, you would not think him rough. He wishes his boys to be active and hardy, and if they misbehave, can give them a sharp word now and again. But he is an affectionate father. Certainly Mr. John Knightley is an affectionate father. The children are all fond of him. And then their uncle, I have no idea who says this, Presumably Mr. Woodhouse.
And then their uncle comes in and tosses them up to the ceiling in a very frightful way.
Then we have an illustration now of Mr. Knightley tossing the children in the air in a very frightful way. The little one, the one on the floor, looks so excited about it too.
It's like, me next, me next.
Me next, Uncle. Oh wait, I don't actually know what Mr. Knightley's first name is. I can't remember. Yeah. I'm sure they say it at some point. But they like it, Papa. There is nothing they like so much. It is such enjoyment to them that if their uncle did not lay down a rule of their taking turns, whichever began, would never give way to the other.
I cannot understand it.
That is the case with us all, Papa. One half of the world cannot understand the pleasures of the other. Late in the morning, and just as the girls were going to separate in preparation for the regular 4 o'clock dinner, the hero of this inimitable charade walked in again. Harriet turned away, and Emma could receive him with the usual smile, and her quick eye soon discerned that his consciousness of having made a push, or having thrown a die, and she imagined he was come to see how it might turn up. His ostensible reason, however, was to ask whether Mr. Woodhouse's party could be made up in the evening without him, or whether he should be in the smallest degree necessary at Hartfield. If he were, everything else must give way. But otherwise his friend Cole had been saying so much about his dining with him, and had made such a point of it, that he had promised him conditionally to come. Emma thanked him, but could not allow of his disappointing his friend on their account. Her father was sure of his rubber?
Oh, that's a
Is it figure of speech?
It's
To be sure of
well,
his rubber?
I'm not entirely sure in this context, but I know that is a bridge term.
Oh,
So it could be referring to the after dinner games, like card games.
All
I
right.
don't know exactly what it is, but I've
I
heard
suppose it's not load bearing plot wise.
no, it's not. I've heard it used in connection with bridge. Which
Yeah.
I don't know if that was a game at this time, but if it was, that would be
But it might have been another game that used the same term too.
That is true, yeah. Yeah.
He re-urged, she re-declined, and he seemed then about to make his bow, when, taking the paper from the table, she returned it. Oh, here is the charade you were so obliged as to leave with us. Thank you for the sight of it. We admired it so much that I have ventured to write it into Miss Smith's collection. Your friend will not take it amiss, I hope. Of course, I have not transcribed beyond the 8 first lines. Mr. Eldon certainly did not very well know what to say. He looked rather doubtingly, rather confused, said something about honor, glanced at Emma and at Harriet, and then seeing the book open on the table, took it up and examined it very attentively. With the view of passing off an awkward moment, Emma smilingly said, You must take my apologies to your friend, but so good a charade must not be confined to 1 or 2. He may be sure of every woman's approbation when he writes with such gallantry. I have no hesitation in saying, replied Mr. Elton, though hesitating a good deal while he spoke, I have no hesitation in saying, at least if my friend feels at all like I do, I have not the smallest doubt that, could he see his little effusion honoured as I see it, looking at the book again and replacing it on the table, he would consider it the proudest moment of his life. After this speech, he was gone as soon as possible. Emma could not think it too soon, for with all his good and agreeable qualities, there was a sort of parade in his speeches which was very apt to incline her to laugh. She ran away to indulge the inclination, leaving the tender and the sublime of pleasure to Harriet's share. And that is the end of chapter 9. We will pick up chapter 10 tomorrow. This went a little long. I think those were longer chapters, and then we also talked a little more than usual. So,
yeah.
In future, I will be aiming to keep these a little closer to 45 minutes. We've been an hour and 10 minutes already.
Oh dear.
But thank you for everyone who tuned in to watch these live. Thank you to whoever is watching them after the fact. I hope that you enjoy them. If you do enjoy them, let me know. People don't seem to talk in the chat very much, which is understandable. There's not people like to just listen, which I get it. But when you're doing a thing, it's nice to know if people like it. So let me know if you're enjoying it. We will be back tomorrow around 6 p.m. Pacific as usual, with chapter 10 of Emma, and I shall see you then. Yeah.